groundbreaking research trials and a big proponent of conservation agriculture. We've done a lot of work with Johann, absolute a pillar of conservation agriculture in the Western Cape, and really I think when the history books will be written one day, Johann will definitely have a place of honour there. Then we have Matthew Addison, an entomologist who has worked in the apple, pear and stone fruit industry for his entire career, involved in various research projects on orchard floor ecology and regenerative agriculture, and he sees regenerative agriculture as a critical element in the sustainable management of orchard pests and diseases. Next to him, Wilhelm Joubert has been since 2006 the viticulturist, that's a viticulturist, at the Hartenberg estate. He's seen as a pioneer in regenerative farming when it comes to integrating herbivores in vineyards. And Hartenberg has also in 2024 become the first wine farm in South Africa to be regeneratively certified under the ecological outcome verification framework. Next to him, Dr. Chris de Brouwer. He's retired, as he mentioned. He started his career in 1984 working as animal scientist at Potchefstroom Agricultural Centrum, looking at beef cattle. Then he became the manager at the animal science division at Potchefstroom in 1997, and 2009 the manager of agricultural research, livestock, pastures and crops and agronomy at Potch, before in 2017 he became manager of the Animal Science Directorate at Elsenburg. Just feel like we translated that out of Afrikaans as I went along, so if I made any mistakes, sorry. Dr. John Tolmay, he's a grain agronomist, agriculturalist, specializing in the Western Cape region. Currently works at Kainach Fertilizer. He's got 35 years experience in tillage and plant nutrition in various production areas in South Africa. He's got a PhD where he looked at the use of planters, something that Professor Johann Strauss would be very interested in and knows a lot about. The difference between the tying planters and the coulter planters. What is the correct English? Disc planters, the scythe planters. And he's returned in 2022 back to the Ferris Cape to work as a plant nutritionist in minimum tillage systems and regenerative cropping systems. So let's kick off. Those are the introductions, and if we can get this cracking. How much time do we have? When do we?
Till 12 o'clock.
Till 12 o'clock, goodness. All right, okay. So I reckon let's start from the beginning. Johann, if we can start with you. Definitions. We've got conservation agriculture, sustainable agriculture, ecological agriculture. What is regen agriculture, and do you think possibly that we have a problem with the name in the sense that it's sort of exclusionary? If you talk about regen or conservation agriculture, if people don't feel that they're doing it, they feel they're excluded, and then you have a sort of a problem for them to be open-minded to adopting it.
Chris, I think the biggest issue for me is that there is no pure definition of regenerative agriculture at this stage. There is a lot of bits and pieces going around. And I think it's a feeling of this exclusion, but rather confusion. Just taking it one step back, base principles of conservation agriculture is minimum soil disturbance, biodiversity, crop rotation, cover, either living or residue. So,
animals
was never written into CA, but it never excluded animals. Something that came out of the World Conference last year in Cape Town is that for some people animals is important in terms of bringing it in, but there are situations where animals just doesn't fit into the system.
Like the swartland.
Not like that, but there are areas in the world where they exclude the animals out of the cropping system because there is not enough time to get animals into the system. So I'm very careful of labeling a system where you have certain things that you need to do. And I'll get to that just now. So once regenerative came along, initially they said they had 5 pillars. And the only difference was cover crops and animal integration. But if you look at the long-term trials that we've been running, we've been including animals in some of our systems since '96 already. And most of the farmers who has animals on farm basically integrate that as well. But I think it's more a question of they focus on high intensity growth. And again, that's something that works well, but it's not necessarily for everyone. So my feeling is just that if you say regenerative, it means a lot. It can mean a lot of things. But if you look at what we've been doing with Conservation Ag over a 28-year period now, we've been regenerating carbon, we've been regenerating soil structure, we've limited erosion, our yields are stabilized, etc., etc. So I'm going to be excluded from regen if I don't have animals or if I don't have cover crops. I think we need to get back to a realistic term and maybe best practice agriculture.
So you agree that the pigeonholing is a problem?
Yeah.
Matthew, do you think? I mean, you come now, permanent crops, orchards, traditionally quite high chemical approach to farming. So what do you understand under regen? I know that some of the export guys can't include animals into their. I know in the low field they're not allowed to use animals. Do you agree with Johann? I mean, how do you see it from a permanent crop perspective?
Now we've got the whole 9 yards regarding the naming. We had a work group that was soil health, but it wasn't descriptive enough, and we ended up at orchard floor ecology. You're trying to name a really complex system. It differs crop to crop. I like regen because we are improving something. We're not conserving it. Conserving it sort of implies to me is it's something there, and you look after it and you try and keep it within sort of parameters and I'm coming from a specific point of view in terms of I'm heavily influenced by biological control, for example, and diversity, plant diversity, because that enhances the biocontrol. So regen, yeah, you're regenerating something to a more sustainable, more resilient point. Do we need a coverall name for it? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think there's so many aspects to the general sort of approach. Best practice, yeah. You apply best practice. Do we need a banner over it? No. Are the names exclusive? Or the naming the type? I don't think so. People look at the approach that people have taken to it. One guy's very hot on compost and mulching, and the next guy's really keen on green mulching, and the next guy's interested in orchard margins and floral crops. So it's very diverse. It's very difficult to name.
So we obviously do quite a bit of work up in the north too, and I mean it completely differs from what Johann has been doing. And Stefan Nel from KAIS actually had a very good suggestion. He said the Afrikaans is herlewenslandbou. He said, why don't we start speaking about oorlewenslandbou? You know, what will, and I want to get back to that whole concept of the toxicity of our farming systems and the impact of that, and specifically when it comes to insects. But Wilhelm, animals have made a huge difference, and you guys have been verified as regenerative. So what do the foreigners, the Savory Institute, I think it was the Savory Institute that where you got your verification. What do they understand under regen? And is it a problem that one, like the organics movement, you have certification bodies that appropriate the what should be a farming system and then become prescriptive about it?
So the verification system is outcome based, so your outcome is measured or determined. So organic can also be regenerative if the outcome is regenerative towards the land. But the difference is with the organic, there's certain stuff you need to do, and with the ecological outcome verifications, there's principles, but they measure your outcome. So if there's a problem, for example, with a certain weed, it's part of the tools of herbicides. I can use it as long as I can still regenerate my soil. So what they see abroad is that you can still be regenerative without animals. You can still regenerate your soil by not including ruminants, but for you to have, for example, land to market accreditation, which is the marketing leg of the Savory Institute, you must include animals. So for those who feel they want to keep on doing what they do and they can't integrate animals due to whatever problem, there's many reasons why not to do it, then it's fine. But what I've seen over years is you can regenerate up to a certain point without animals, and then you hit the ceiling and it will slow down. But I've seen personally the biggest explosion or biggest momentum we got was when we integrated the animals and stuff just happening, and it's just excellent. And I don't think we'll ever reach the ceiling of that. Animals is informed. Personally, a crucial part of the whole regeneration, but like I said, it can be excluded and will still regenerate, but somewhere along the line it will slow down. That's my opinion.
Just for you for a moment, if you could just stay with you, just give us an idea of the outcomes. So you say it's outcome based, so just give us an idea of what those outcomes are that you need to achieve to get the verification.
So they look at the 4 ecological systems, and I can only remember 3 now, but the one is, for example, the energy flow. It looks at the amount of sunlight you capture, because it's about carbon sequestration in one hand. Looks at the abundance of your green leaves, cover that you've got on the ground. That's the energy. Diversity, of course, is the different plants you have, shrubs, grasses, whatever, different diversity of plants, and then water cycle, how much water you capture, is there any erosion, is there any capping, anything that's got to do with keeping your water in your land and not getting it off your land. The 4th one, unfortunately, so, probably I can't just pull that file now. Quick on me now.
So Chris, we're talking about animals. We're talking about animals in the Western Cape, and it always strikes me how different the Western Cape is to the rest of the country because of the winter rainfall. I mean, if you look, I remember the first time I drove through the Swartland in the summer. It was quite astonishing. This entire landscape that had been ploughed over. It's not where I come from, the Eastern Cape, something that I'm used to. It's very different in the summer rainfall areas. So if we're talking about animals and we're talking about the symbiosis between animals and natural pasture, veld. In the 50s already, John Aycock, a big botanist and a animal scientist in many respects, already spoke about understocked, that South Africa, the problem with South Africa is that it's understocked and overgrazed, which means basically selective grazing is the #1 problem when it comes to natural grazing. Do you agree with Aycock's? Is that the problem? And why is selective grazing something that we, since the 50s, haven't really been able to drive home with farmers?
I think I agree with Aycock's to a certain extent.
as you mentioned, I worked in Northwest for quite a while as well, and we had the extremes over there in terms of stocking densities and the utilization of veld in general. So in the work that we did in Potchefstroom, for example, we used a system that was controlled selective grazing. And that is a system that was developed out of the findings of ACOX in terms of overutilizing your more palatable species, which then leads to the decline of your palatable species and eventually eradication, and the quality of your veld as a result of that declines dramatically, and your carrying capacity and all those other parameters that we measure. So in that regard, yes, I agree with what ACOX said, understocked and overutilized. But in that regard, we were looking perhaps a little bit selectively as well in the more commercial sector of South Africa. In Northwest, we managed parts that were part of the old Viticulturist, and there we had areas that were like 600% overstocked. And there you end up with what you saw in the Swartland, that looked like plowed lands, overutilization, and the animals had nothing to fall back onto anymore. So there it was not a case of understocking, there it was a genuine case of overstocking, total non-selective grazing, but continuously without an end. So in the controlled selective grazing, there was the introduction of camp systems, mainly 6 camp systems, where you rotated the animals and you had somebody monitoring that the utilization of your palatable species was not excessive. And as soon as the devegetation of the grasses reached a certain level, the animals were moved to the next camp, and in that way you didn't lose, you actually grew your palatable species in the veld. So in the research we did at the Potchefstroom station, we went from an average carrying capacity of around 6 hectares per large stock unit to about 2.5 hectares per large stock unit. But that requires very intensive management to be able to achieve that. So I think it's the whole middelweg when it comes to a lot of the practices. If I may just go back to the whole conservation and regeneration debate as well that has been mentioned. I went and looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and conservation is defined as careful preservation or protection of something that already exists. So there's much to what was said. But regeneration is renewal or restoration of a biological system. So there's next to no difference between the two, according to me. And I think we're a little bit too fond of giving things names. And in the process, we create a lot of confusion, and it makes it difficult for the intended recipients of the message to now really be clear on what is this or what is that. And so you're preserving what is there, which was mentioned, or you're renewing or restoring something that was there. So to me, it's very similar. And my one concern about all these naming conventions and fad words and so on that are going around is a lot of it gets linked to marketing. And then people want premiums on those prices and all the rest of it. And I don't think that is the way that we should go, because ultimately agriculture is there to feed the nation and to feed the world. And I understand farmers are in a battle to survive economically, but all of these different naming conventions and so on is not doing anything to make the consumer clearer on what exactly they are buying.
So before I come to you, how healthy is our food that we eat? Any takers on that? I mean, how also very good food.
I don't think, Chris, there's an issue with the food that we're producing. I think there's an issue with what happens to the food after we produce it. I think if you just take white bread, for instance, what we produce and what a guy buys on the shelf far different from each other, with all the additives and stuff that goes into it. I think that's the problem with our lives these days, is that we're not eating proper foods. I've been worried about this, or comments about Yeah, there's a lot of things going around saying conservation food, agriculture food produced by that is, they love to call us chemical farmers, but it's not nutrient dense. But when I go and look in literature, I'm looking for what wheat's values needs to be considered nutrient dense. I can't find it. So how can I measure myself in terms of that? And it's easy if you pull an example here, an example there, and you don't say in what type of thing it comes from. And there is a lab in America that tests stuff like this. And then they show you a graph that's dropped so much from 1960 to now. Doesn't tell you much. So yeah, I don't think in terms of the farmers that I work with is negatively or looks at it just by looking to get money out of it. They actually really think about what they do. And they would change inputs if it's something that works, that's shown to be working, and if it's a healthier product, they will use it. Because none of us wants to use a chemical, but the reality is to produce food on a mass basis.
And there's a lot of misinformation. I mean, if you look at Roundup, the World Wildlife Fund, that report that they brought out, it was actually quite instructive, where they actually found that if we didn't have Roundup, we would have been spraying a lot heavier chemicals. And I thought that was, there are trade-offs, and I just thought that was just an interesting perspective on it. But we can get back to it now. I think Dr. Tolmay, you are, I'm afraid, are in the firing line. Professor Strauss does all the work in the cropping systems. You've done a lot of research on planters, which is sort of the sharp edge, sharp point of the cropping system. I mean, that's basically, if things go wrong there, your whole year falls apart. Correct?
Correct.
And I mean, if I look at it, I've only been in the Western Cape for a full time 14 years. I can hardly believe that you still have people that do broadcasting, but we were talking earlier about it. You said, well, they actually don't do too badly. But the two types of planters that have developed, the tine planter and the disc planter, the scythe planter, and the mespint or the tongue planter. So just for the sake of clarity, just give us a quick overview of the differences between them and why these two types of planters developed and under what conditions they're being used.
Okay, if we go back to around 2000, the first planters were introduced from Australia that could actually penetrate our soil, put seed in the soil, and those were tine planters. And we called it no-till, but it never was. It's basically a one-pass operation. So that tine gives you a fair amount of tillage, loosening of the soil, as you are planting. But that enabled, within the cropping system, a whole new revolution. I don't think we've seen many things adopted at the rate that planters were adopted in the Western Cape within the space of 10 years. And I think a lot of people had the idea, well, this is now embracing the green cropping system because we are now working on a no-till system. And I think the reality and the truth of it is, it was never around the green effect, it was around efficiency. Because one of the main problems with seeding before the era of planters was with the amount of tillage that had been done. The time went away, got lost, and I had a farmer one day tell me, he said, when I was still using the old system, he if it rained, and the rain stopped tonight at 12 o'clock, I still sat on my stoop for 3 days before I could get into the field. When the planters came, the rain stopped tonight at 12 o'clock. By tomorrow morning, 12 or tomorrow afternoon, 12 o'clock, it's dry enough and I can move into the field and I can continue my operation. So that talk, still in my mind, shows the efficiency that the planters have brought. So that changed the whole landscape within the Western Cape.
Sorry, so this is both tine and disc, eh?
No, at that time it was only disc. Tines, yeah. We still believe that the tine wouldn't last until tea time in those days. So because of the stony soil. So over time, the tines were basically dominant for at least 50 years or so. Some of these soils that were under conservation for long enough became so much better and so much more covered, because everything is about coverage, keeping the soil covered, that they couldn't get through it anymore properly with time. So they were looked at an alternative, which was then the disc planters.
So just for the clarity of everyone, basically the tine moved and the stubble started packing up on the tine, so you couldn't get through it, correct?
When it was too much. So the original design of the tine planters was so that it could get through a fair amount of stubble. But as the soils improved, that stubble got too much and they couldn't get through it. So the disc planters started becoming popular. So
they could cut through.
Physically cut through. I spoke to a planter builder at Nampo in last week, and he said that about 1 out of 10 planters that he produces now is disc, and the rest is still tine. So overall, I think we're still not there that disc planters are even at a 50-50 level, equal level. I don't think we'll get there soon, anyway. And the funny remark that he made, he said, many of the planters, the soils are not ready for discs. If you look at the research situation, like Johann and them on Landbouweekblad, where everything is controlled and small plots, and you can really manage everything ideally, that disc planter works well. And so that is where it basically comes from.
So basically, 1 out of 10 planters is a disc planter, and 9 out of 10 are still tines.
For one manufacturer, I don't know the rest, maybe.
I believe, I know John has said now that it's still soil disturbance. Yes, there is still soil disturbance with the knife, but it is less than 25%, and that's where it's classified as.
Yes.
You need to be below that in terms of no-till. I think that there's nothing wrong with the tine. As John indicated, the problem is as guys move along in the system and keeping more material, it becomes a problem with clogging and etc. And that's where your disc becomes an option. But again, I can take you now to Landbouweekblad where we've planted with a tine planter for 15 to 20 years, and I've been using a disc for 6 years. There are still camps where there's at the side of a camp where I need to use a tine. If there's not material, the disc will not go into the soil. So again, you come back to situational use. If you are focusing on keeping as much material as you can, that will be you will need to go to a disc sometime because it can handle that amount of material. I know some guys are still doubtful, and that's fine. And it takes a while. I mean, we've started using discs in the trials in 2012 at Riversdale. And the farmers that sits on that farming community of that trials laughed at us when we said we're going to use the disc. And the first disc we got in from Brazil was actually designed for irrigated pastures.
And did they laugh at you?
They laughed at me. They literally physically laughed at me. It's just never going to work. And the first year it didn't work. But it came with side wheels. And John and some of you guys know that trial site we have there is really rocky. The cover crop there is basically rocks. So with that side wheels, the planter actually did this the whole time. So you get very poor seeds in. First thing then next year we threw off the side wheels, put a press wheel behind, and we haven't looked back. So much so that farmer is now planting with a disc seeder. And they're not necessarily using disc seeders that's developed here. They might use a frame from Equalizer and then import a disc set from Australia, for instance, because they feel that works for them. But there is development going on the whole time. It is improving the whole time. So there is nothing to say you can't use a disc or you can't use or you should use a disc. Whatever works for you.
So the guiding principle is stay practical, whatever works for you in your circumstances. So let's just take a step back again, just for the benefit of everyone here. So what are you trying to achieve, Johann? What are you trying to achieve? Just give us in a nutshell, what is it that you're trying to achieve?
Well, basically we're trying to build a soil structure so that we can get quicker water infiltration, so that we don't have that runoff and erosion going. It's to help keep the water in the soil so the plant can use it for longer. I want the water to go through the plant, not through the row in between the plants. And building that soil structure over time, it takes time. And it's interesting now, we've got some, just now this week we had some articles coming out that we were doing with some other disciplines on the trials. In terms of insects, in terms of soil life. We never, when we started these trials in '96, the idea was never soil life. It was erosion control firstly, and sort of economics played a role. Guys with other issues. So we never focused on putting anything out of a bottle or adding microbes or everything into this whole idea. Over time though, if you build it, they will come, basically, like the moon. And they've shown now that all this stuff is there. But it also depends on the crop that you're putting in, what microbes are associated with the rhizosphere. It actually, if I put in a wheat crop this year, it actually selects out of that pool what it wants next to it. There is still disease causing microbes as well. But as it builds, it's actually starting to suppress that. So by just doing the basics, you've done a lot. And that grows. And then you can start adding all the nice things. And we just had you were there, the Conservation Act conference in the beginning of August. We had the professor from Groningen University that said, it doesn't always help putting a thing out of a bottle into the soil. They've tested like 10 trichodermas. After 3 days, none of them were left because the soil was taking them up, the microbes that's there. So we need to be very careful when we get to saying what we're aiming for and what we need to be part of the system, because that could actually backfire on us.
But the point I'm trying to make, the final analysis, what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep farmers at their farm. So what I'm saying is that, because that, I'm trying to get to that point, and I'm going to come to you now, Matthew, is at the end of the day, we're not trying to save the planet, we're trying to keep farmers on their farms. And we've arrived at the point in the debate where we've realized that maybe nature is not wrong. Correct? Maybe we should be looking at how nature designed the system. I look at old Landbouweekblad in the 60s and the 70s. We were throwing a lot of poisons onto the dear Lord's creation. So what I'm saying is, it's just for the benefit of this conversation, is we really come to the point that maybe nature isn't wrong, and maybe we should be looking at how to harness natural systems more effectively to keep farmers on the farm by allowing them to farm cheaper. So
better maybe.
better. So give us out of your perspective, Matthew. Where did this journey start? At what point did you realize, shucks, maybe we need to look differently at the problem?
No, I got let into the water slowly. It was a resistant spider mite population. Lots of chemicals, very expensive chemicals going on, and Ken Pringle, who was at Stellenbosch University, said diversify the cover crop, work like a dream. And it's been slowly developing from there. To answer your question, we and my colleagues in the fruit business, we sell fruit. You've got to stay financially viable. What can regen do to you? Economists talk about the productive asset, and if you ask people, say, "I know it's my tree," it isn't, it's the soil. The soil doesn't go away, the tree goes away every 20 years. So the healthier your tree, the logic goes, the healthier a tree, the better it produces, the healthier the apple is, the more nutrient dense, etc. And you don't have to spend a whole lot of variable cost on trying to control insects. We're getting to a crossroads in the industry now. We're having active ingredients, pesticides withdrawn locally and internationally, and yes, we do export, so that's very important. And we haven't adopted this holistic approach. We've got little bits of it. It's sort of we have to integrate that, and that's regenerative. The basis of that thing is regen. So yes, it is producing a food type over time, and you must stay in business. Are the results out there? They know, or they haven't been published. What we need is the definitive, the split plot design. That was regen, that was conventional. There's some little ones, but they aren't big enough. Wilhelm does his farm. That's part of my problem. It's really good. There's some apple farms that are very strongly regenerative. Their production, their fertilizer use is extremely low. Their spray applications are extremely low, and their tonnages are in the top 10%. Yeah, it works, but we need more definition. And then the economic analysis of that is incredibly important.
So just to pause there for a moment. So we're talking about chemicals, and we're talking about fertilizer, and we're talking about the economics of it. That all costs money, it's all expensive. Fertilizer is what on the grain farm is single biggest
Not anymore.
Not anymore. What is it now? Chemicals.
And application.
Yeah, because
So basically, if we can get the plant healthy, we will. You can keep the insects away from it, correct? Is that what you're looking at? Getting the soil healthy, to have a healthy plant that will produce a lot of whatever you're producing, and a healthy plant won't be that susceptible to disease and to insects and to pests. Correct?
In general. But then there's some very specific ones where without that cover crop diversity, sorry, I'm hung up on it, but there's the cover crop diversity. Without that, you have major pest issues.
But explain to us, okay, so give us this, let's just deal with this issue of cover crop diversity. Explain to us why the cover crop's important and the diversity is important.
From the biocontrol aspect, spider mites. We all know about spider mites. So they get into your tree, and you spray for other pests that disrupt their biology and their predators. And then the game is on, because you have these explosive spider mite outbreaks, and the miticides are extremely limited in terms of availability and what you can use. And yeah, it's a mess. And there's some importing countries that have got zero tolerance for any mite on an apple. So diversify your cover crops. So in winter they're on the cover crop, and they have a number of predators that come and eat it. And those populations over time balance, and they never get out of the cover crop. Now, the predators, some are generalists. It's a complex system, but some are generalists. So if you've got a mulch layer in there, you've got non-spider mites, but they're little creepy crawlies in there, but the predators also eat. So it's a complex system, and it's without that plant diversity, you can't. The more plant diversity, the better, because the spider mites don't go onto grasses.
So you're creating an ecosystem, and then while everyone is busy with an ecosystem, the fruit trees got time to quickly grow and produce fruit, which you harvest, and they don't give the tree any attention. That's more or less.
Yeah, and the overall population of spider mites just gets lower and lower and lower and lower until it stabilizes. So spider mites there, but they're very few of them, and the predators. So if one gets on a leaf, it's not an issue. It's going to get eaten.
I want to confirm what you're saying. We haven't spoken, again, based on Conservation Act, we implementing all of these type of things. We've managed our nitrogen down in some of our systems. We haven't sprayed any insecticide glyphosate in the trials and the whole farm in 7 years. But that's because of making a conscious decision not to start spraying, but bringing in cover crops and multi-species cover crops as borders, and within some of our systems. We never say we're never going to spray again, but up to now it hasn't been necessary to actually, we still do scouting. This year is going to be interesting because there's high pressure, wheat aphid pressure, and we're not sure if there might be some diseases that plays a big role due to these aphids that we've been seeing. But again, you go into the field and there was aphids and then suddenly they're gone. We actually have funguses that's growing on some of the aphids. The diversification brought back insect-eating birds that wasn't on the farm. Backyard foxes. We even have an art fire back on the farm. It's not so nice for the harvester because it's apparently it's a big one because it's a really big holes that he's digging. But again, that's suddenly the biodiversity, not only in insects and predators, but birds. All of that, it's a process. It's just not switching off and think everything is working next year.
And you've got to try not to go broke while the system resets itself. So Wilhelm, we're talking about biodiversity that Matthew was talking about. You've now upped that biodiversity by bringing in animals in your vineyards, which adds another layer of kickstart to the ecosystem. Give us some sort of idea of what you've seen the impact of animals make, because as I understand it from what we've written in the Landbouweekblad about you, that was a game changer. And why do you think it was a game changer? What's happening in the soil?
I think so. Our journey started almost 2 decades ago without having known that it was, like we call it Landbouw. So we started with a bit of cover cropping, but farming conventional, and then tried to improve what we're doing. So I started in 2006 on the estate, and then I had to do 3 passes with the disc just to get a seed bed to plant a cover crop. And knowing that that's not sustainable, trying to improve soil structure. So we also only looked at, soil is actually 3 parts. It's chemical, the chemistry, the biology, and the structure. So we divided it in different sections. We looked only at structure, maybe at chemistry, never took biology into account. But like Johann said, if you create a system, it comes. So we try to farm better, getting the structure better, getting better cover crops. But if I have to, I'm actually answering your question now with a youth, but I think pivotal points was when we started doing cover crops, that wasn't the norm. In the wine industry, usually it was like oats and koroch for many years. Those were planted, but we started with medics. And I think when we also started with diversifying, one scared in the beginning because you do not know what's going to grow there. So instead of doing a mix in one row, I planted one row of this, one row of that, one row, every second row the same, and then different vineyard, another cover crop to see what grows and what works and doesn't work. And then at the end of the day, started mixing that to get diversity in terms of cover crops we should plant, because then we only started to see what is a cover crop, what was it designed for. Taking account that it's got different root systems, different benefits. Before it was just a cover to cover the soil for weed suppression or to keep moist or to improve structure. But once we understood that there's more to a cover crop, we actually got more out of it. But then once we integrated the animals, we actually only started looking at soil biology. Just prior to the integrated animals. So we had an idea what's going on in terms of soil biology. If I refer to soil biology, the test that we took, because soil biology is also very diverse, it's like regen, it's not really easy to define, but we looked at eelworms as the bioindicator before we integrated the animals, and then integrated the animals. We actually split the vineyard in two, farming in the same way, cover crops, and grazed one off, ungrazed, and we kept that parcels separate, took the same samples. Now the chemistry, takes time, but in terms of the diversity of the eelworms, it just from where we had no animals to compare to animals, just was two different worlds. And that first measurement which we took was 7 weeks, or the second measurement which we took was 7 weeks after the animals was removed from the vineyard. So we, it blew our mind because, people said, no, we don't see any result within the first 2 or 3 years. But we actually saw it within 7 weeks, and then we just kept focusing on that. But the animals bring more than just grazing. It's the way they trample, it's the saliva, it's the microbes in the rumen. So it's also adapted to your farm. So which they deposit is also full of microbes, which also has got an effect on your soil, and which is actually suitable for your environment. Instead of like you put a bottle in and after a few days there's nothing living. So it's actually keeping what's on the farm, just giving it a place to flourish. If that answers you, I'm not sure.
Because I see you're nodding your head. I mean, are we underestimating the symbiotic relationship between soil and animals? I mean, we like to think in silos. We like to think Orden. We like to think, ek se saaiboer, ek's nie veeboer nie. But the regen and natural systems aren't linear. They're messy. They're interconnected. Yeah.
I think I was of the same ilk back in the day. I was a veekundige, and the wynkundiges did their thing, and the agronomists did their thing, and so on. And as time passed, you realize that these things cannot be on their own. They are all integrated. And over time, I've heard it very often, and it's been repeated here several times now, that agriculture is actually soil. Everything that we harvest in agriculture comes from the soil, the trees and the grass and the animals and the meats and the wheat and everything. And what has become clear for me here in this discussion is that realization is taking hold. And that, I think you mentioned it as well, is that in the olden days it was all chemicals and everything, but nature actually knows better. And that is very encouraging, that for me, all of these initiatives, whether it's conservation agriculture or regenerative agriculture, is moving back to the way that nature did it. And for me, I think the challenge in agriculture has always been that we need to provide enough food for this ever-growing human population. And that has driven humankind to go the conventional agronomy routes, to use the chemicals, to use the fertilizers, to maximize everything. And when you maximize a system all the time, it's going to burn out at some stage. And that's where conservation agriculture and regenerative agriculture, if they are different, come into the picture. I still think they pretty much one and the same thing. I don't think there's a terrible difference between them. So when it comes to the livestock aspect, conservation agriculture, regen, I think regen is the more recent term that's being used. Again, back in the day, when I started working in 1984 in Hortgro, we had a system trial going there and looking at wintering of cattle, for example. And one of the systems was the utilization of crop residues. So for me, that was already a form of conservation agriculture, because you were recycling nutrients back into the soil. You were having the effects that were mentioned, that you have the trampling effects, the soil disturbance effects, and all of those type of effects. And you were looking at the economy at the same time as well, because instead of having to feed those cattle, they were utilizing something that would have otherwise gone to waste. And so for me, that was almost then, looking back now, not then, looking back now, that was almost the start of conservation agriculture for me. And then linking back to Acox and his assessment of the veld in the country, but in the high veld in particular, the system we were using there with selective, selective beweiding and control selective grazing was also a form of conservation agriculture, because you were preserving the palatable species, and you were looking at decreasing the number of unpalatable species by letting them become moribund. They keep on growing and they basically implode on themselves because they get too big. And yeah, I think a lot of the concepts were born back in the day, but now we are starting to name them, and it's very important that the idea grow that soil is your basis for life on earth, basically.
I just wanted to, a friend of ours, and Johann also knows in DF5, who farms up there in the Kalahari. He always says he farms with two herds of, he doesn't farm with cattle, but he farms with two herds of microbes, the one in his cattle stomach and the one in the soil. And I just wanted to just stop for a moment on the topic of diversity. So we've done some work up in Rice with ultra-high density grazing, and we've got Fritz van Oudtshoorn who did the veld surveys and so on. And what we found, this whole concept of diversity. You know, when I grew up in the northeastern Cape, rooigras was always your climax grass, and that was if you had huge plant of rooigras, then your veld was in good condition. You know, and if you think about it in terms of diversity, that's actually a monocrop. You know what I mean? And what we found with the veld surveys is that there's been an incredible return of diversity, specifically legumes and breeblare. What's that breeblare? Broadleaves. And specifically cool season grasses that stay green right through the winter. And the legumes specifically are mostly medicinal. Do you think and what was interesting is that Fritz actually had to get other specialists in because he didn't know anything about the broadleaves or the legumes because he was a grass specialist. Do you think that in your experience that science maybe went on a bit of a dwaalspoor to get too specialized? Because if I listen to Wilhelm and I listen to Matthew, it's the messiness, the interconnectedness, you know what I mean? It defies the scientific need for order and for. Do you think this? Do you think that science lost its way, but not lost its way, but you know what I'm trying to say?
I think I must be very careful. I've got
in a room full of scientists.
I've got a very specific views on these things, and a person can go on long tracks with it, but the longer you study, the more focused you become. And that becomes dangerous, according to me. You start getting so myopic. Yeah. That you just see one thing and you don't see everything that is affecting that what you are studying at that point in time. So for me, the general approach is much better to try and link all these things. And don't misunderstand me, our pre-grade courses were laid out like that. We did anatomy, we did agronomy, we did pastures and everything. But as a person advances academically, you become narrower in your focus. And I don't think that's always a wonderful thing. In terms of what you mentioned about the rooigras, that was what I grew up with as well, especially in the Highveld. Interesting to hear that in the Eastern Cape and so on as well. And it does come down to a monoculture. And in the Highveld instance, rooigras was palatable for a very small part of the year. And the rest of the year just stood there and ultimately created a huge fire hazard in the winter and everything. And through the controlled selective grazing, we also saw a decline in the rooigras because it was also not being utilized to stimulate the growth and everything. So yeah, I think we do run the risk of becoming disjointed from our associated disciplines, as it were. You can't have animal production without your plants. You can't have your plants without your soil being in a healthy state. And all of those things it's nice that it's becoming so messy. And I think it's long overdue that it's becoming so messy. And that we need people that are able to bring all of those things together. It's wonderful to hear the guys talking that are on the ground and doing it in a vineyard and so on. That when I came to the Cape in 27, I was fascinated to see that. I remember when I came on honeymoon very long ago that the vineyards were bare. It was just a vine and there was nothing there. And when I came down now, you saw the vineyards with all the grasses and the other plants between them. I thought, they're not keeping their wine vineyards clean as they used to, but actually there's method in the madness that's being done now.
I think, Chris, I know one of my colleagues likes to say, if you go into nature, the normal way, before we disturb them, animals and plants are always living. We separate them.
And not only animal and plants, but animal plants, insects, microbes, fungi. I mean, the whole interconnectivity. I mean, often Dani Slamet got to a point where he said he doesn't understand anything anymore. And then you know that whole thing of Socrates, of the true wisdom is when you realize you know nothing. And that is also sort of in conflict with science, because science is trying to pigeonhole things and make sense of things. But Matthew, I want to come back to you in a moment. But John, let's get back to planters. So we hear about diversity. We hear about, but the cropping systems in the Western Cape are monoculture. They're not monoculture, but they are. We have limited options. We have wheat, we have canola, we have lupins, we have barley. We don't have so many options. So we try. You spoke about the time planters, that they still the technology that's being used. But in your day job as working for a fertilizer company, I mean, give us some sense. Are we getting away with less fertilizer? I suppose it's realistic to think that we will get to a point where we use no fertilizer, because that's just not the nature of producing food crops. How far are we down that line of having planters that disturb the soil to such a degree that the natural systems are coming back, and we can cut back specifically on our fertilizer use? Give us some sort of sense of where we're standing in that journey.
Okay. There's a lot of diversity within farmers as well. So you get the extremes. A lot in the Western Cape, especially in the Swartland, if they have dairies and so use a lot of manure. And those are the guys that are actually doing very well, putting back manure in. They lower their fertilizer, the nitrogen significantly. Their crops are better, their crops are more resilient, and I think they make more money anyway. So they are the stable the stable diets, and that's also an integration between animals and cropping. Then you get the pure cropping guy that says, I buy my meat from the butcher, I don't want any hooves on my farm because it complicates things and this and that. So there's a huge difference in the integration of systems. I think our biggest issue that came with CA is our total dependence on chemical control of just about everything. And yes, there are farmers that plant a bit of lupins. Also, where there's a crop rotation with lupins or medics, we do see that the next season's nitrogen can come down, and that we still have the proper protein requirement, better grade of wheat. So yes and no, there are farmers that still go for the 100% nitrogen requirement, which is about 120 kg per hectare. And unfortunately, most of that is lost. Not most, but a lot of it is lost to volatilization and leaching in the two years that we had previously, before the season. So yes, it's difficult to answer that absolutely directly, but I think in most farmers' minds, they want to get rid of high inputs, and that's across the board. And we spoke about that earlier. Application costs. One of the big problems with the 2 wet seasons was the use of aerial application. All of a sudden, which wasn't budgeted for. No way to get into fields, and the only way to get a bit of nitrogen, not even the full requirement, into the field was by spraying by air, and that made a huge impact on the business side of just blew their budgets out, and many of them are really battling at the moment because of what happened in the past 2 years. This year started off very, very well, beautiful, and now it's being on our knees praying for rain again because it's really getting dry, and we're at the critical stage of this. This next 2 weeks now is absolutely critical. So yes, it's very difficult, and I'm glad I'm not a farmer sometimes.
Well, just maybe jumping with what John is saying is that it all comes back to developing your system.
Yeah.
I mean, we've like I said, we've had systems where we've integrated animals from the start within the medic systems. But what we've seen now with the last 3-4 years that we've brought in a dirty medics as a system as well, where we plant the cover crop into the medics. That is a game changer actually, in terms of having enough food on the farm and not.
What you planting in there?
It's just a mix of some cereals like rye and oats, rye and black oats, and then put maybe a little bit of lupin in as well. Because you have your base with the medics. And managing your animals on those systems is critical, because actually that brings down, if you manage correctly, it brings down your input costs in terms of weed control. Ryegrass is a huge problem in the Western Cape. Everyone knows about it. We have resistance. We are monitoring that in our long-term trial. And the systems where animals are part of the system, the numbers are much lower.
But I think that you would get a bigger uptake on animals. I mean, if the oaks and the swartland could produce enough food for them, because that's the issue.
But again,
nothing grows in summer.
Yeah, I think that comes in where the animal research comes in as well. What breed is actually the best suited in this area? We had on the trial from the start mutton merinos. We've now changed to a Natal. It's still a merino, but it's a smaller frame merino, so I need less to keep it going. And that made a huge impact on our fodder flow throughout the year. But interestingly enough, in those systems, we're actually managing down our inputs in terms of fertilizer, of weed control. There's that recycling of the natural nitrogen that the medics is binding and the sheep is eating and converting. We see less leakage. Last year, for instance, John was mentioning it with all that rain. The wheat following the medics in that year, or the previous year's medics, only received 30 kilograms of nitrogen the whole season, right? Compared to the spear cropping systems where we have lupin in it, but once in 4 years, which needs more fertilizer still, because otherwise it's not producing. But still, the medic on that lower amount of nitrogen had better yield, better grading. But it's a system. The problem is everyone in the Swartland can't farm with things. So it's all the pH dependent. So we need alternatives. That's the big issue. Is we have a trial in the sand at Oakfield. Medics doesn't work there. So now everything goes well. We actually got the seed even a little bit late to do it this year, but we'll be seeding new cerebellus for that area to test it, dry seeding and normal seeding, to see if we can get other pasture options for them. Cover crops is an option for the animals as well. But again, it's a development over time. You have to invest in this system. And it's not a silver bullet. I mean, some of our base farmers now is complaining that with the input prices going up, even though a lot of them are using much less inputs, the commodity prices is not keeping track. And that's actually forcing them to crash as well. So they're doing nothing wrong in terms of them improving all the time. Yeah, but there's no support.
But the sum is just not.
Yeah, I mean, we don't get any subsidies. We went to England 2 years ago for a conference, and then we went and visited some farmers there. One guy actually has visited. He's got a friend in the Swartland. Visited our trials 3 years before. Got to his farm. They get 650 pounds to plant cover crops, alongside the hedges, which they also need to keep, or just having a piece on the farm that's not planted and planting cover, or planting a mix of 4 cereals for the birds in winter. Our realization of that is, if we got that, the guys in Indica will plant cover crops and go on holiday because they will be making more money.
So, and I want to just open it up to the floor. Any questions from the floor? But before I do that, it's actually just something to consider. It just occurred to me now that diversity that you're looking for in natural systems, maybe that's the sort of diversity that you need in your scientific systems too. That you've got multidisciplinary approach to this problem, because it's not a, you're producing wheat, and it seems like a simple sum. But there's sort of a multidisciplinary problem that needs to be solved. All right, any questions from the floor?
More a comment than a question. If you look at pest control, it's more an area-wide issue. If you have a piece of bossyveld next to a wheat field, we are now picking up a lot more indigenous insects inside the crops that are starting to actually become quite problematic. And you cannot say, well, I'm only a wheat entomologist, because you have wheat, canola, and everything that you do this year influences which insects will be prevalent next year. And that includes things like spray for a fungi, because you take out the natural enemies of, say, for example, the aphids Johann was referring to. If you spray fungicide to stop stem rust on the wheat, you're killing the goodies that control your aphids. And you cannot possibly work only in the one little silo of small branch. You actually have to work on an area-wide basis. So saying that, I think that's something that we definitely need to look at within the region, is to make sure that what's happening in the apple orchards, what's happening in the vineyards. We had a piece of information information about the stem rust, not stem rust, leaf rust that is occurring on the wheat now was actually picked up on the triticale inside an orchard. And so the one crop keeps the pest over or houses it during the off season for the next season on what is the main crop for one industry. And then absolutely just, I won't say irrelevant, but a very small part of the other industries. And we definitely need to have a lot more of that integration.
Any comment on that? What about indigenous fynbos as a cover crop? I mean, has that ever? I know that Rose, Martin, your wife, does a bit of that. Has it ever been? I mean,
it's a border, yes. I would like to have a border all along my fields.
I was suggesting
getting all the necessary, getting started, not as easy.
Chris, yeah, and it's a very hot topic within cover crops and orchards at the moment. We took to the seed company and plant cover crops. They're all exotics.
Well, this is the thing.
So we're looking for, and World Wildlife Fund is putting money in, looking for indigenous plants, not just grasses, but obviously they're looking hard at grasses. So there is an option. Diversifying into plants with traits that we need, like deep-rooted stuff that's perennial, is beneficial, and start producing those commercially and getting them into orchards, and then let the succession take its course over time. Yeah, area-wide, you mentioned it. There's preservation of diversity across the valley. I think is also very important. And we're not paying a lot of attention to margins, for example, and there's a lot of biological or cultural pest control, pest and disease control you can do on the edge of your crop to prevent stuff actually getting into your crop. Push-pull technology in maize in East Africa is immensely successful with small-scale farmers. We don't use it at all in South Africa. Our small-scale guys just don't use it.
Why would you do the research now? About the next, I see you're not paying attention. You switched off here. Oh, where is the natural? Didn't the Australians come and collect a lot of seed and go off and develop that?
That's the issue. It's like Levica.
Yeah,
they came and got it here, took it across.
Why did we allow that?
We're actually going to plant some now as well. But yeah, there's just for us to start doing that and setting up everything to do that and take it up to a proper place where it's an actual crop that can be planted again. Spend out the money.
But I mean, I'm thinking about people like Chris Becker and people like this that are, shouldn't a person, when you're talking about diversity and multidisciplinary, I mean, Chris Becker's got the entire Kirstenbosch working at Babylon Student. Shouldn't a person be speaking to them about, indigenous research on indigenous plants? I mean, there you've got Sporotech that's done that research on the families of microbes that colonize roots of specific plants. I mean, we had an article about the earthworms in the Swartland, but that both species of earthworm in the Swartland are actually exotic. I had about 2 weeks of abusive phone calls after that article. But what I'm saying is, I mean, there's obviously a gap in our knowledge.
Chris, to Vicky Walker, I think a few statements. First of all, I think we've been very traditional in looking for funders for research. And something Phyllis myself spoke about the last 2 weeks quite intensely. Of course, Becker is not on the radar for research funding, if you know what I mean. We would rather go to our traditional Cape Pools, Winter Cereal Trust, whatever the case may be. We should go and find the Chris Beckers for research. Those guys has really got the mullah, but it's got the understanding of what we want to achieve. And I think those philanthropists, if I can call it like that, they are out there. So that's my first statement. My second statement is maybe a bit of a controversial one, seeing that I'm still being paid for the next 2 weeks by government. And that is, I think we've spent too much airtime on land reform. We should spend airtime on soil reform. No one talks about soil reform in South Africa. And the good stories about soil and everything that you're talking about today is not out there in the media. I'm not talking Landbouweekblad, I mean you're doing an excellent splash, but I'm talking standard media. What we get often, and I've been inundated the last 2 years on emails, these activists saying agriculture is killing the soil and all the agrochemicals and the toxicity in the rivers and farm workers. And we sort of every time just backpedal on those. We do not come out with the good stories of what we do to limit the use of agrochemicals, limit the use of fertilizers. Those stories are not out there in the main media, and I think there is a huge gap that we must do that as well.
Well, I mean, Johann and myself were just about a week ago on Kabaz Myron's show.
Yeah.
About regen farming and so on.
Yeah.
And I mean, we try and carry that message up, but you're right. I mean, and specifically the funding. I think you'd be actually amazed at where you know, and maybe you guys should be speaking to us because that's our business, is getting people to pay us money for stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, maybe government is too static on you know, and it's actually a point I wanted to ask while you're now bringing it up about soil reform. If you look at regen farming, it starts actually ticking a whole lot of boxes. It starts ticking a land reform box because you can suddenly intensify vertically, not horizontally. Yeah? Correct? It starts ticking a climate change box. It starts ticking a poverty box because you can start putting all those cattle that you have in the Transkei, you can start putting them into herds.
Chris, I've got a question for you. I shouldn't do this. Please explain to me why there's this massive resistance to regen.
Well, I think it's because it's exclusionary. I think people feel, and I think there's a psychology to, and Johann will be able to bear me out on this. There's a psychology to farmers that we don't always appreciate. It's herbicide resistance. I mean, the Australians have found that a big part of herbicide resistance is actually the psychology of it, to get farmers to understand, to actually read the labels. Because they've got a problem, and they'll gooi die gif, because they want to solve the problem. And I think there's a psychology to it that if you say, do you do regen farming, people firstly think that they're being judged on the fact that they're not doing it. So you're judging me, and it's sort of a fundamental, you know, and people then get their barriers up, their skunks up and say, well, you know, just bugger off. I mean, I have this conversation all the time with guys like Dani Minna, who's a very, very good farmer. He's chairman of Sendex. I was just telling John before the session. And then he sends me pictures of his maize and said, just look at that residue that you've got on you a conservation agriculturist, a farmer. And then he wants to have a heart attack. No, definitely not. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a psychological thing, Johann. But you are in a good, because most of your farmers are receptive to it. Not in the Western Free State.
I think there is sometimes a perception problem as well. Guys just saying, but I've got a very special soil. Western Free State is a very good example of having a very special soil. But if you going back to where Conservation Act comes from, it comes from South America. But it started off in America with the Dust Bowl and then making changes. But it comes from an area where they have 2,000 millimeters of rain a year, and the system works there. And it works in a country like South Africa where we're water scarce in Western Cape. So it's adapting the principles to your farm. And I think the biggest barrier is guys expect to put something in And immediately at the end of the season, I need to get something out. With Conservation Ag and Regen Ag, it's a time thing. Some things you see quickly, but other things takes time to develop.
And that's where government should be coming in. That J curve of adoption. You know what I mean? I mean, this is what my friend Donnie Sabato said. He said, I'm paying the school fees here. Nobody's helping me. When I've got 50 hectares that's been eaten by a cutworm, and I'm not spraying, who's paying me for this? You know what I mean? I've got to figure this out. I mean, if we just had a scientist going in there and maybe doing like samples, sap samples of the maize, and see is there maybe something that the maize is not nutritionally making it susceptible to the cutworm, what's going on, but there's nothing, you know what I mean? You've just got a farmer looking at his maize being charred up, you know what I mean? And I think that is where government should be coming in, and I think, as you're saying, Ilse, I mean, soil reform, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, when you're looking at small-scale farmers, I mean, this is the sort of farming you want them to be doing. You know what I mean? Because this is sustainable. You know?
But Chris, a few years ago, we sat in panels where we were working on a policy, a national policy for conservation and promoting the ideas of sustainability and keeping the soil going. Nothing's happened. It's 5-6 years down the line. Then when I got funding from the FAO to do it, but nothing is on the table. And so that's getting that thinking.
Where you have my experience in the fruit industry, where you have a convert to cover crop, and you'll never get him all, and it is spread. I don't want to be seen too much of a sin. Planting cover crops under trees now is becoming relatively popular. But the ingress of the technology into the industry could be more informed and quick.
George, whilst you hear from National Department of Agriculture, Chris, I think the whole funding for research from national side should be looked at a different level. And what I mean with that, George, is that if we as the Western Cape researchers, let's make an example, if we see one or two farmers like Wilhelm and Pussy from somewhere, they're doing excellent research because some of the best researchers are farmers, then we should be able to motivate to you guys that farmer should get support for his research. But it should be supervised by a strong researcher. You can't just have people phoning in and say, I'm a farmer and I think I'm doing research, please pay me. There should be a sort of a validation process. And those farmers should also be supported for the research they're doing. Because as you say, the guy is saying, I'm paying the school fees. Now we from Western Cape, we don't have funding to support that farmer. But isn't that something that you can look at? You could even have small-scale farmers who's doing research. And that farmer gets support. But there must be a pure scientific anchor with that person. Otherwise it's just another cost of getting money to
So I'll tell you
farmers.
an interesting development. We spent 2 weeks ago, we spent 3 hours with Hartenberg, the CEO of the Landbank, the entire management team, myself and Donnie Slubbers. And they had spent a day on Donnie's farm in Rights, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to lend money, borrow money, without proving that they are actually invested in ecological farming. So I think the push is going to come from the financiers, and we're seeing it with the banks too. Except that they're still getting away with fairy tales. You know what I mean? They sort of they call it greenwashing. They sort of like invest on the side, but they're not really getting serious. And I've actually got a lot of hope that the Land Bank might, because they went. Temba took his entire management team for an entire day, and they sponsor Rights and Ottosdal and our 1 year. They spent a day on Donnie's farm, walking around, looking at it. So I think that might change. But yeah, I mean, it's got to change, because how else do you do it? I mean, it's not, the adoption rate isn't fast enough. But I mean, Wilhelm, why don't, they're you doing it, why doesn't your neighbour come across, because the Donnie's neighbour was said, no, you get more rain than him. And he's actually right. He's actually right. Donnie does get more rain than him, because all the rain that Donnie gets goes into his soil. His rain, half of it flows away. So he's actually, in a weird paradoxical way, he's dead right. So why don't the farmers with you, why are they?
Before I answer it, I just want to give credit, because in the wine industry, things maybe turned around a bit. So we had a 2-year project with the University of Stellenbosch prior to September 2024, which I initiated. We saw results. I went and saw the head of one department said, listen, we're busy with this. We want service. We can see the results, but we can't prove it scientifically. We want somebody that's credited to come and do a trial for us. So we partnered with the University of Stellenbosch for a 2-year trial, and then SA Wine, on top of that, added another 3 years of a multidisciplinary study, looking at not only soil but also what happens through the vine, up into the grape juice, into the wine. So that started. It was launched in March.
Yes, this year.
Yeah, so we're currently busy. So thank you to SA Wine that invested in that as well, and the University of Stellenbosch again is involved in that to give answers, because there's lots of stuff happening we do not know. But my neighbor actually did come, because they were forced from their wine buyer to go organic, and they said no, it's not sustainable. They want to rather follow our principles. So they did come and see me, but it's going to take a while. But it's raining more at my side as well, because I'm catching all his rainwater, because everything's run down. I fill my dams with his water. So at the moment I'm happy that he's conventional. But yeah, this is because it's easier to do what is known. The fear of the unknown is the problem. And it's way easier to take a tractor and to kill the weeds than to leave it and make a plan without herbicides. It's more difficult to farm regenerative than to farm conventional. It's way more rewarding to farm regenerative than conventional. Rewarding not in terms of money, but psychologisch and sielkundig. But once you've managed to get your system rolling, it becomes easier. But the first steps are more difficult. When we moved over, our tractor movements became more instead of less. But we're now at the stage where I've got way less tractor movements than when I was conventional. It takes time. It took me 17 years to get rid of herbicides. I'm herbicide free. I do not do herbicides, but I do cover cropping. And I always said that the best herbicide is weed suppression by good cover crop. And the other day, he told my hand, he said, no, it's not suppression, it's replacement. You replace weeds with cover crops, because in that system, as it gets healthier, your weeds actually disappears. So it's actually replacement. So you learn. But trial and error. I do lots of trials on my own, and I make lots of errors. And that's the thing, in the beginning I tried to get my neighbors, I tried to convince them. And within the first season, I noticed that, we are klipkoppe, our farmers, we are klipkoppe. We don't like being told, you want to figure it out. So I tell them what I do, the mistakes I made, but I tell them the results I get. And there's been momentum. But
Chris, your initial groups, those groupings that you had within the fruit industry were and I think concept highly encouraged.
No, we need to resuscitate that. The thing is that we've also got a problem with in the media. I mean, we also basically exposed to the cold winds of commercialism. You know what I mean? So we also desperately trying to not go broke while adapting to the new media landscape. You know what I mean? So they were with Johann van der Merwe. Yeah, and I should speak to you. You should take you to Nama and get those resuscitated. We should do it in collaboration with Johann, because if you look at the success that we've had with collaborating with Johann and them has been phenomenal. So let's talk. Just quickly, as a fertilizer company, how do you see this conversation about sustainability over the long term? We spoke quickly beforehand, and you said your mission is not selling more fertilizer. That's not what you do.
Yeah, just basically, I think for us it's about keeping our clients on farm, and whatever that takes, that's important. So, from an advisory point of view, I have to take the farmer's whole situation into cognizance. We do soil sampling, we do liming, and we do specific nutrient level recommendations, and also to the conservative side. So for instance, here in the Swartland, a first top dressing is normal standard. The second one is not normal, necessarily normal. As a fertilizer company, we would like everybody to do a second top dressing if it's necessary. But there were years that we walked around and say, don't buy. Don't waste money now on a second top dressing. The situation is not suitable for that. You're going to waste your money. Please don't do it. So yes, we also try and help them and advise them from the advisory side to stay as sustainable. We go out, we measure nitrogen levels, and we take careful decisions on top dressings. I think there are times that we have to say, well, where we are now and where the crop is going, we'll have to give a bit more just to make sure, especially on wheat, where protein is a very important quality parameter. Make sure that they make it, because it doesn't help they have a very big harvest and everything is underground. So yeah, we try and manage that, and I think there's a perception out there that we're just pushing tons, and it depends on companies. But I think the responsible companies are all on the wicket that for us to stay sustainable, we have to keep him on the farm and make sure that he's there next year.
And I think that is also a big thing with is, you know, getting the farmers on board and also getting the commercial companies on board, for the long term.
I have a question in understanding regenerative agriculture. You know, I know it's not really, it's not a practice per se, it's principles that you have to comply with. The reason why I asked that question is because I've actually got two questions. Here is a vegetable farmer here that rotates or that plants 2 or 3 crops a season in 1 hectare. And here's a citrus farmer that does very robust land preparation in the first year and then keeps the crop permanent for the next 20 years. They've both got a good red Hartenberg soil that is nice and well drained. What does regenerative agriculture look like for these two guys? Is it one size fits all, particularly because this guy has got, he's turning around, he's planting 2 or 3 crops a season, and this guy's got 1 permanent crop. He can create an ecosystem there. And then my next question is, does regenerative agriculture borrow from other good agricultural principles, or other good agricultural principles borrow from regenerative agriculture? I'll take, for instance, climate smart agriculture. When you're doing climate smart agriculture, you only apply the amount of fertilizer and the amount of water that the tree needs. And you don't apply more, so there's less runoff, there's less wastage, there's good taking care of the environment. Likewise, in terms of your sprays, you only spray based on the need rather than prophylactic and doing things like that. So it's just those two things to say, do they borrow from each other or they cross-pollinate, and where are the crossroads? And the other one is regenerative agriculture on the basis of one that is planting vegetables and one that is planting a permanent crop.
You bowing out.
I have a shot. I like I like the comparison of the fixed, the citrus farm and the veggie guy. The veggie guy has the advantage he can rotate, so he can do stuff annually on his farm. The principles remain the same, though. The underlying principles remain the same. We do have a problem with regen in citrus. They're quite hesitant about it because of unknown effects, but it is going to be keeping soil covered, definitely growing stuff that's getting nitrogen, balanced nitrogen into your soils, carbon conservation. They're both worried about ingress into their soils, longevity of their soils, and trying to hold back on. I can't say it with citrus, but holding back on disturbing soils. And the principles are common across it. Yeah, practice will differ, obviously, and their pest and disease complexes obviously require different management. Your second question, very often, it's like reading old Landbouweekblad. You realize that in 1940 they were actually pushing the principles that we are now pushing. So we've done a cycle. Multi-cropping maize, for example, is one of the regen conservation successes. East Africa, Khan and his friends did it. One doesn't want to get too political here, but I think there was an existing agricultural, or some existing agricultural practices that were removed, and we relearned stock, herding, high density stock in arid areas. We don't do it, we put a fence around it and bugger it.
Yeah, I just think two examples. The example of herding in the former homelands. I mean, where I grew up in the Eastern Cape, I mean, you had herd boys go out with the cattle. That was high density grazing, where they moved them around. And then another interesting example was in the northwest. The old chap told me they used to plant akkerbonen between the millies. And the insurance companies came and said, "You're not going to do that because those akkerbonen are using the moisture. Take them out." And that was actually a cover crop and a nitrogen fixer. So companies, I suppose just out of ignorance, also play the role.
Again, I agree with Matthew that the principle stays the same. I think there's a lot of work needed in the vegetable field. There is some trials that guys started doing. I've got a PhD student now that's actually summarizing some of the things they tried with CA in vegetables. I think that needs a relook. I think there was some issues with the design and stuff like that, but there needs to be work. But the principles stays the same. You're just adapting, making it work in your context. Same with what Dani is doing, and a lot of those farmers now doing, planting the cover crop in between the maize rows. It works because they're planting X amount of centimeters away from it. It's going to be much more difficult doing the same thing in wheat, where our rows are 170 to 250, but might be 300 balls apart. We're trying something with medics, and we've got one of the fields that's part of the bigger trial, but we haven't put down any fertilizer for 3 years. This year it only got a 20 kilogram top loser. But keeping the medics going within the canola, just knocking it a little bit down in the wheat, because otherwise the wheat doesn't come through. So there is options, but again, finding the money of people willing to invest in something that's supposedly weird. I mean, Ilse has sent some stuff now that we could apply for. They want a 2-year trial. And my experience is a 2-year trial is worth nothing in terms of putting these concepts to actually work. And they expect these brilliant answers within 2 years. Not going to happen.
So just on the vegetable thing is that a lot of the crop farmers that do regen up in the north and plant potatoes, and that is a hell of a destructive thing, because you obviously take the potatoes out and complete soil disturbance, and the first thing they do is they just put a cover crop in afterwards, and that's, you know, you've been in that potato land of Donny.
No, I haven't been in Donny's, but we've done some work here this week. We're now busy with a possible project again with cover crops and potatoes. We're doing it with rooibos as well. Yes, there's crop types that will need disturbance of the soil. It is a fact of life.
Fact of farming.
The thing is, what do you do in the years in between to build up your soil? I mean, there's enough evidence that once of strategic tillage, even in Conservation Act systems, is not detrimental. It won't turn over the whole apple cart and now you have to start from scratch again. But if you're going to do something like that, it needs to be well thought out, and the reason for doing it needs to be correct, and when you do it, it must be done correctly. Because if you're not doing it correctly, don't do it, because then you're going to cause yourself more problems.
Understand why you're doing it. I think there's a question here. 2 questions.
Yeah, it's more related to 1 or 2 comments earlier. But in supporting farmers, the other thing that we had a fantastic Farmers Day last week, but I couldn't make it, unfortunately. But having farmers to move around farms, learning from each other, it seems like there's a culture amongst regen CA farmers. There's a willingness to share, unlike other commodities where there's a capital mindset and I'm holding my formulas for myself. These farmers are willing to share. And I think we should make a bigger effort of getting them together on the ground, looking at soil profiles, and there's quite a big interest coming through. And it is specifically fruit and vineyard farms that I'm referring to. Things like certification processes, which is a headache for farmers. I mean, they can get a letter from the Western Cape government in their global gap file stating you are doing regenerative, you are building land, you're building soil. Following the principles. That would be a very fantastic contribution to the farmer in his certification. So that's a small little thing that doesn't cost money that could be done. Just to mention, somebody said about fynbos. There's a farmer in Rudy Base. Okay. They're replacing, a little bit extreme, but they're taking out vineyards to create corridors for the insect life. It's costing them. So there's a lot of informal research happening on that for fynbos at a cost of 522,000 rand a hectare, replacing his vineyards with fynbos. So there's definitely a mind shift. I just think that the talking and keep on talking, but on the ground, in the field, with a profile hole, yeah, that would be the route to go. The question I want to ask is all of this, because there was a very passionate discussion on this, what we're talking about today. I just want to ask a question. How much of this culture, this vocabulary, is used in our universities and our agricultural colleges? How much time is really being spent on having that mind change at that level already? I don't know.
I can answer for Stellenbosch entomologists and conservation students a lot. Very strong, very supportive system, and the response of the students is very good.
Same with the government.
Yeah.
I had a group of 14 students yesterday on a farm tour about regen. So I get, because I'm connected now with University of Stellenbosch in some way, I get a lot of those stuff, and I do try my best to accommodate them. There's also a lot of questionnaires from sustainability that I just keep on it's running through. You know, I don't like the computer, so I pass them just on. But tour groups, I do them a lot. I think I spent probably from mid-July till up to, well, I did G20 Summit yesterday on the farm, regen tour, on a trailer in the vineyard, showing the cattle, the G20 delegates. So I spent probably 4 days out of the week with 1 or 2 groups or a farmer. so there's lots of traction, but I've reached a point where I should still farm as well. Topic, but there's a willingness to share, and the University of Stellenbosch really, I must say, I'm quite impressed with how they're coming along. We're going to get Elsenberg there as well, so just find a way to get him here. I've got my brother's daughter studying animal science, and it's alma mater of mine. 30 years ago I was there as well.
Best extension officer, and he's not on our payroll.
Yeah, I was just thinking you should let Landbouweekblad know. You weren't at that farmer's day. It sounded hell of interesting that a person amplifies the message. There's a question on the...
Yeah, funny enough, it links to Rudolph's first comment about certification. I always think in terms of measuring things. And I'm just wondering what the panel's thoughts are, just very briefly, because we can get into a whole other discussion about what are some possible indicators to measure the success of, whether you call it regenerative or sustainable. And I know it's going to vary slightly between the different subsectors of agriculture, but if we wanted to create a spatial map of adoption, successful adoption of regenerative agriculture, what could we measure to be able to do that? And is it even a feasible question to ask that? Is it possible?
Soil cover.
So, carbon.
Is it carbon? Is it cubic fraction? But it's...
No, cover. No, you're the satellite guy.
Cover throughout the year.
I agree.
And if possible, biomass per area within the season.
I
So it could be biomass of aliens.
Our cover crops are aliens, yeah. Point taken, but yeah.
I think it's a difficult question, Mark, because I've get this feeling the last few months that everything is turning myopic in terms of just carbon. Everyone is just focusing on carbon. So much bigger than just carbon.
Yeah, and you have to have some other data, because I mean, it can't just be biomass, because that biomass may be produced by heaps of nitrogen. So, you know, I just think to try and focus in on one thing to measure, soil carbon is kind of the fallback one, but I don't know if that's
difficult. Carbon is very difficult.
It's a one parameter. It's a system. We're forming the ecological system. We're forming with, it's not only the farm, the vineyard, it's also the fynbos.
Yeah,
it's not only the fynbos.
Not observable, so you need to actually get input, unless you're getting input and interacting with the producers and know the systems, you can't really make a judgment on.
Yes, so what I said earlier about that fourth one that I couldn't remember, I can still remember about the EOB, the verification system, is looking at the 4 ecological systems that influence a healthy ecological system, meaning soil, sun, water, and diversity. And then what they do is they create a baseline for you on your farm, which is yours. It's different from the guy next door, it's yours. Exactly. And once you have the baseline, you know where you're at. And it's not about a number that I'm 10 and you're 9, so I'm better. No, it's about giving you an indicator where you're at, and then the short-term measurements and long-term measurements, which you over time need to improve. So whatever you do, the outcome should be positive, regenerating your soil. So there is parameters which they follow, which has been proven over many years, many decades, which they use. But it's about getting your baseline and then improving on your own terms and your own speed. You don't want to integrate animals, you're only doing cover crop, you're going to move at that speed. If you want to, in a fast lane like me, you're going to do it different, but it depends on your own, how it suits you on your farm and how you can. So I don't choke people on the farm. I put the cattle in like this. I've got 5 herds of 12 animals in a herd. I move them every day. I give them the principles and how I do it. And what I want them to learn from that is to see what I do and take that picture and implement something that will suit for his farm on his way. I believe the animals must sleep in the vineyard because when they wake up, I get them in urine. The other guy is saying, no, I can't. I let them sleep in a kraal because I put my biochar there and I inoculate the biochar. So one or the other, but the end result is we want to regenerate. And there's another thing on regenerate. The Hebrew word for regenerate means rebirth. You cannot rebirth something old, you rebirth something new. So we're actually creating new soil. We're not sustaining soil. We're creating new soil, better soil. We're actually improving. If we are there to sustain, we are in a bad space. We need to improve. If we want to leave the land better for our children, you can't just sustain. We need to improve. And regenerate is actually building new soil, a better ecological system, a better improving. I want to improve.
I agree with Wilhelm in that, but we must be careful also. It will improve up to a point, we will get to an equilibrium. And that's it, the problem with carbon is everyone was chasing carbon, but the fynbos in the Western Cape has a carbon content of 1.8%. So if I can get my farm's carbon up to 1.8%, I've done really well. If I can get over that, then you're great. But yeah, someone out from outside can't tell you, listen, you must go up to 3 or 4 or 5%. It just doesn't going to work like that. And the bad part is it always comes back to our farmers. Companies don't buy less cars or use less cars or use less trucks or lose the farmers needs to make a plan.
I think that brings us to the end of our panel discussion. Thank you very much, Johann, Matthew, Wilhelm, Chris, John, and Ilse. That's it. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your seminar. Thank you very much.